Great. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Becky, I'm the Chief Exec of the English Association, and I'm really pleased to be hosting this session. A quick word about the EA. We are a learned society and subject association for English, and we were founded in 1906 to promote, support, and celebrate the discipline of English studies. We cover all stages of education, from primary and early years through to secondary and further to higher education and beyond. And we cover all parts of the discipline across language, linguistics, literature, and creative writing. Events like this one are made possible by the fantastic contribution of our volunteer speakers. So thank you so much to Emma, Georgie, and Angela for sharing your time with us so generously. Our members also make it possible to keep these events free and open to all by paying their membership fees. So if you would like to contribute to the national conversation about English and help support our discipline, please do consider joining us. It costs just £55 to support our events, campaigning and advocacy work for a whole year, and you get access to a range of member benefits, including online access to all our journals. Okay, that's me done, and now it's time for the good stuff. So it's my pleasure to hand over to Angela to get us started. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Becky, and a huge thanks to the English Association for hosting this webinar today. We're incredibly grateful at the Opening Doors team for the support from the English Association and across the Common English Forum. There's a whole group of us. I'm chair of NEI, which is another English association. We work very closely in partnership with each other, and it's wonderful that we've got that kind of network and landscape of support amongst this particular subject discipline. So thank you, Becky. I'm going to do a couple of quick introductions. I'm going to just start by introducing myself in case you're not sure who I am. So my name's Angela Jenkins. I'm a member of the Opening Doors English Consultancy team. Our leader, Bob Cox, is on the call today, making us feel incredibly anxious that he's monitoring the impact of the quality of our work. But it's lovely to see you, Bob, honestly. In addition to being part of the Opening Doors team, I also work for a local authority as an English advisor, school improvement partner, and undertake other consultancy work independently with a range of schools and local authorities and multi-academy trusts across the country. One of the schools I've had the very great pleasure of working with over many years now is Penn Primary and Nursery School in Slough. And I'm delighted today to be joined by two colleagues from Penn, Emma Mann and Georgie Allen. And I'm just going to hand over to them briefly so they can introduce themselves to you.
Hello, I'm Emma. So I'm Deputy and Lead English, and yeah, we'll talk a bit more about our context later.
And I'm Georgie, and I co-lead English with Emma, and I teach in Year 6.
Thanks, Andrew.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, ladies. We'll be coming back to Emma and Georgie about midway through the session this afternoon. They're going to share a case study with us. They are a member of our Opening Doors network of schools. They're also a Talk for Writing training centre. And I know that they're going to kind of talk through with you how they've integrated those approaches in order to enrich and stretch and challenge English learning in their school. So I'm really looking forward to them sharing that with you a bit later on. I'm going to attempt to share some slides now. Becky's got these, and I know she'll share them with colleagues after the session. So please don't try and write lots of things down unless, of course, you prefer to make notes for yourself as you go. So let's have a go. So I'm just going to do a quick check with Becky. That's all okay. Brilliant. Thank you. And everyone can see that. So by necessity, because this is a kind of shorter session, shorter webinar, we're really zooming in on some specifics today. So the Opening Doors approaches to teaching English more broadly, we're just going to kind of skim across because we're really looking at how they apply to improving writing, and particularly about improving writing in the primary phase. Okay, so of course the principles and the strategies and the approaches are applicable to all phases, to all year groups, to all contexts, we believe, because we're all about equity and excellence for all. But because of the narrowing down, oh, that happened without me clicking, because of the kind of we've got a 90-minute session and we want it to be interactive, and we want the opportunity for colleagues to ask questions and have a go at reading and writing some non-fiction. We're going to kind of zoom in on particular types of non-fiction, and we will of course be talking about reading and oracy, because all of those modes of communication interact with each other, but the particular focus of this session is around writing. And I do need to flag that by attending today, you're entitled to a 30% discount on any of the Opening Doors books. There's a QR code there. And obviously, as Becky said, you'll get the slides after the session as well. And that's valid until midnight, the 28th of February. I'm particularly going to be drawing on the non-fiction chapter of our lead book, Opening Doors to Ambitious Primary English, which you'll see on the screen there with a light blue cover. So a number of the points I'm going to make in talking about improving writing, I'm going to refer to non-fiction particularly, but Emma and Georgie in their case study are going to talk more broadly around reading and writing and the connections between them across the English curriculum, and not just non-fiction. And if you enjoy listening to that marvellous case study that's coming, and you'd like to do a bit more work with myself and the colleagues at Penn, we actually are holding a day next week. If you want to strike while the iron's hot, you could immediately after the session today email Emma and say, tell me a bit more about this day that you've got on looking at English writing at Upper Key Stage 2 next week with that focus on narrative. We'd love to come along. I'm sure they'll mention it as well themselves. So moving on, I'm going to start with a provocation, if I may, and I'm going to invite you to have a think about whether you agree or disagree with the following statement from Christopher Such, and why that might be. So I'm just going to give you a few moments to have a think about this particular statement. If you have any thoughts or responses to that, you might want to post in the chat to share with other colleagues. I was intrigued by the date. Look, it's almost a year ago, just over a year ago, that Chris posted this. So I think one of the things it makes me think about is that there are some risks, dangers, potential unintended consequences of relying on just using one example or one model text or one mentor text when we're inviting children to write in a similar genre or for a similar purpose and audience. That might involve a kind of copycat responses. So lots of responses that are too closely linked to the original. You might have some more kind of generalized formulaic responses as a result. Does it potentially encourage a checklist approach to teaching writing just by having one example that we look at closely together? Is there a risk of us continuing the legacy of the kind of text type approach to writing, particularly in relation to non-fiction, that those of us who were working in education when the national strategies were around, maybe that's, that's our experience, but that's a previous curriculum. Maybe we're continuing without necessarily intending to, perpetuating that kind of text types approach to teaching writing. So I think I would agree to an extent with Chris. And one of the things that as an opening doors team that we like to look at is, rich, ambitious, high quality text. And then exploring a landscape and a range of options, a range of mentor texts, so that we can really think about the different ways of being successful and applying what we know about what makes for an effective text for purpose and audience, but knowing about different ways of being successful rather than being confined to one model. And I can see a number of people have posted about that in the chat. Emma and Georgie, feel free to contribute to the conversation there too, please, as Talk for Writing ambassadors. Okay. So that was just to kind of get us started. I think I wanted to just set the tone in terms of what Opening Doors is about and how we draw on an evidence-based, evidence-informed approach to teaching English. This EEF evidence review published in 2019 highlighted some key characteristics of programmes for teaching writing, curriculums for writing that produce good quality outcomes. So we've highlighted and grouped together there some of those key characteristics because we think that that's really well reflected in the kind of approach to teaching English that we advocate. Okay, so we're really about that learning together, thinking about how we derive and inspire writing to be a pleasurable act and process. That if we're motivated to write, we enjoy writing, that will and thrill of writing will improve the skill. We very much firmly believe that. We think that being a writer is about being able to kind of taste the soup, evaluate your writing as you go, check it does what you want it to do, and make those changes, make those tweaks, make those revisions as part of the process. You'll hear me say a lot, I think, from quality text to quality writing. So we really do advocate that journey from reading into writing, that balance that's mentioned here in the 4th bullet point. But we also don't shy away from the importance of direct instruction, explicit instruction, modelling and guided practice of particular craft moves and structures in writing. And we do think that it's helpful to, as teachers, as professional learners, we have a go at reading and writing in the way that we want to teach reading and writing. So we are going to encourage you to do a bit of that this afternoon. So that's what the Slavin's review highlighted. And this is how we would kind of represent, I think, the Opening Doors approach. And hopefully you can kind of see the hallmarks, those characteristics of effective writing programmes in this graphic organiser. So our big principles, as I've said already, are all about choosing great texts, ensuring there's a challenge for every learner, but appropriate access strategies in place so that everybody can participate in exploring and enjoying reading and writing. We do think that it's essential to map that journey from quality text to quality writing through rich learning dialogue, and some of the strategies we'll exemplify during the course of the session this afternoon, such as taster drafts and using a range of access strategies. As I said, we're going to try and bring it to life for you this afternoon. So next thing I'm going to do is share with you a little snippet of a text based on a unit that the ladies at Penn will know well. And I'm going to ask you to see if you can identify from which of these three books this extract might be from. Okay, so I'm going to read you a little snippet and ask you to think about what kind of text this might be. Is it from that first book, Everest, The Remarkable Story of Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay by Alexandra Stewart and Joe Todd Stanton? Is it the middle book, Mountains, A Dazzling Geographic Journey? Or is it the third book, Women Who Led the Way? So here's the snippet. Whatever people choose to call it, one thing is certain. Everest is an extreme place. Which one do you think it is? I'm just looking at the chat. A few people have posted already in there. They've gone with number one. Got one vote for one. Two votes. Someone's gone for number two.
Angela, could I just ask you to stop sharing your screen for 1 second?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sometimes we get a Zoom crasher and I need to work out who it is in the Zoom room. If you don't mind continuing without your slides while I try and resolve that. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, I'm going to leave Becky to deal with that. I'll go back to the text. I read you just one little snippet. I'm going to read you a little bit more, see if you can work out whether you might change your mind or whether it consolidates what you were thinking anyway. At the highest points on the mountain, conditions are so harsh that no animal or plant can survive there. Temperatures can plunge to -60 degrees centigrade, and powerful winds of more than 100 miles an hour buffet the summit for most of the year. Meanwhile, violent storms can dump up to 3 meters of snow at a time. Thank you to those colleagues who are posting in the chat and explaining their choice. Some people have changed their mind. Okay, I'm going to read you one final snippet of text from the same page. What made Hillary and Tenzing achievement all the more remarkable was that they had triumphed where so many others had failed before. Climbers had been trying to reach the top of Everest for more than 30 years. A huge amount of time, effort and money, not to mention national pride, had been invested in these attempts. Despite this, each one had ended in disappointment and some even in death. Now, I know you can't see the text anymore, but it may be that you've revised your view or yeah, some people have gone, no, I've gone back to I'm going back to number one, Joe's put. Just having a look. Yeah, a few others have changed again. It's gone back to number one. It's now focusing on the people. Absolutely. I'm just going to minimize the chat for a moment, just so I can see everybody on the screen. Becky, are we back to slides yet or not quite?
Yeah, I think we might be all right. I'm very sorry, everybody. I'm going to turn sharing back on, but if we have another issue, I'll just ask you to stop sharing again. Sorry about that, Angela.
Yeah, no problem. I didn't think it was me who'd managed to put me.
No.
Anyway, okay. So the reason that I asked us to kind of have a go undertaking that activity was to get us thinking about that range. Oh, something's gone a bit odd on my screen now. Hang on a sec. Best laid plans, everybody. Okay. Let's try that again. Okay, I think we're back to normal service being resumed. Yeah, so the reason that I wanted to kind of share different snippets from the same double page spread, it is book one, it is Everest by Alexandra Stewart and Joe Todd Stanton. But the reason that I wanted to do that was to kind of illustrate how even within one particular non-fiction text, we might find a range of different structures and formats and voices and viewpoints. And that's one of the things about really fantastic non-fiction, is that authors who are passionate and driven to both delight and inform their readers make every effort to draw upon a range of strategies, a range of different craft moves to kind of entertain and engage and interest. And there's so much really high quality non-fiction out there. What we want to make sure, I guess, is that in our landscape of literature and our tapestry of texts, we've got access, and we're giving children access and exposure to that real range and breadth of high quality non-fiction reading and writing, because that's what's going to inform their quality voice, their voice, choice and agency when it comes to writing their own non-fiction texts. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just flagging some work of some colleagues in America that some of you may have come across. Melissa Stewart and Marlene Correa, who have significantly influenced me in my thinking about non-fiction, reading and writing. One of the things that they have written about, Melissa's quite a prolific writer of non-fiction for children and young people anyway. But that they've sort of explored this idea of classifying or grouping different kinds of non-fiction texts, rather than, they say in fiction, we often classify genre, whether it be crime or mystery or sci-fi, but we often can fall into the trap of lumping all non-fiction together. And what they've tried to do is explore, broadly speaking, the kind of characteristics and craft moves that are used in different types of non-fiction. So this idea of 5 different kinds of non-fiction, although very often these texts are hybrid, and definitely that's the case in expository literature, but it begins to help us explore, I think, that breadth of non-fiction that's available. And if learners have a good sort of handle on the characteristics of each kind of non-fiction, it means they can more quickly and easily determine the kind of information that they're going to find in a particular book. They can predict how it might be presented, and they can begin to kind of develop their own preferences and the sort of non-fiction they enjoy reading most. I'm going to say a little bit about each type, but I'm not going to spend too long on this. There are lots of materials freely available on Melissa Stewart's website if you wanted to know a bit more about their work. But they talk about commercial non-fiction in relation to active non-fiction, the kind of non-fiction that directs the reader to perform a particular action. So that could be hobby books or recipe books. The browsable non-fiction is really more about a kind of a book that you scan and skim and find particular facts and information on. You'll see the Guinness World Records is given as an example here. Traditional non-fiction texts are kind of more all about books. So you get a broad overview. That it's almost kind of survey-like, really. It's all about a topic, a good overview. And then those two forms, those kinds of non-fiction that are described more as literary, broadly divided into the narrative non-fiction. It follows a chronology, often tells a story. We might say biographies, autobiographies, and travel logs fall into narrative non-fiction. And then expository literature, sort of the kind of text, a bit like the one that I've just read to you from, where there are some elements of that traditional non-fiction, traditional style non-fiction, but with a kind of unique voice and passion for a particularly focused subject. So if we're thinking about how we might work with non-fiction in the classroom, are we considering that breadth, that range of non-fiction? Are we ensuring we can kind of grow the reading miles and the diversity of reading that our youngsters engage with by having that breadth, that landscape of texts to grow both their knowledge of a particular subject, but also their knowledge of different forms of non-fiction text? We talk in Opening Doors terms about a rich tapestry of texts. So non-fiction being part of a kind of golden thread that runs through all our units, runs through all of our teaching, whether it's a particular focus and foregrounded, or whether it's part of a broader landscape of reading, but it's never a bolt-on. It's about integrating non-fiction into all of our English teaching and learning, rather than it having a kind of tokenistic place, maybe a 3-week unit on persuasive writing, or with writing instructions at Key Stage 1. So I'm kind of, I guess a big idea here is positioning non-fiction as central, working with clusters of text rather than single versions, using that to explore concepts such as intertextuality, how writers use language and structure to effectively convey information, and really broadening that range of link reading so that we grow our background knowledge, our general knowledge, our content knowledge. So, for example, if I'm reading The Last Bear by Hannah Gold in Year 4, perhaps I read some non-fiction texts around polar bears and threats to their habitat in order to kind of get a deeper meaning and understanding of my core text. But non-fiction always has a part to play within our teaching, within the units that we work with, because we can learn about those different text structures, the different ways that those authors use grammar and language and literary devices, and that using multiple texts can actually really strengthen children's knowledge of how to be successful writers themselves. I'm just going to quickly do a quick hats off to Emily Weaver, from Rowner Junior School. Emily, I believe now, when she wrote this particular article, this was assistant head, as now a teaching and learning lead across the trust. But they spoke with me and contributed a wonderful case study to that Opening Doors book that I mentioned earlier, about that weaving of rich tapestries of texts. And I had a great opportunity to spend the day at Rowner exploring how they do that and going into lots of classrooms, talking with children about that. And you'll see she kind of highlights here, it's about the quality of the text taking centre stage. So a big idea for us is about that full range of non-fiction reading and writing, the role it plays, the ambitious choices that we make, and recognising that in very many cases, and particularly in relation to expository literature, there will be kind of hybrid models of text structures, text format, voice, viewpoint, and literary devices within those particular non-fiction texts. So I'm just going to kind of take a moment and do a little pause here, because we're going to have a look at working with a particular non-fiction text in a moment. Just check if there's any questions or comments in the chat. Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so from quality text to quality writing then, that's where we're going next. Why do we want to have a rich and ambitious reading experience in order to strengthen the quality of children's writing? And as I said, I'm particularly focusing on non-fiction, but I know that Emma and Georgie are going to speak more broadly about how they've applied that opening doors approach to improve writing at their school. So I've just I'm not going to read these out to you, but what I think makes a difference in terms of the type of quality non-fiction that we use, in addition to kind of growing that subject knowledge, as I've said already. And of course, we've got great opportunities here to ensure we're reflecting a range of realities in the text that we choose and use. But we're growing children's knowledge of different forms and structures. We're helping them to recognise that big idea of a writer making their decisions, crafting their text based on their purpose and audience. What is it they're trying to achieve? What is it about their audience that they know already that they can use to tailor the choices that they make in their own writing? Understanding, therefore, that writing is a craft, and that we deploy certain moves in our writing in order to try and have the effect we desire, and that there's a joy to be had from reading and writing non-fiction texts. So let's have a look at a snippet. Let me take you on a journey, a wild wandering. A fascinating world awaits. I wonder what this text could be about. What kind of text could it be? What do you notice from this snippet that you think is particularly interesting and engaging? It's your first response. Please use the chat to post some comments. Thank you, Joe. Let's mention the rich vocabulary. There may be a particular phrase that leaps out at you. I sometimes talk with youngsters about finding their MVP, their most valuable phrase. What jumps out, what leaps out at you, what takes your interest, what piques your interest? Thanks, Emma and Georgie, who like the wild wandering and the direct address to the reader. Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, suggest going outdoors, something freeing and liberating. People are noticing the kind of stirring of curiosity as a result of the way that this little snippet is phrased. Joe's mentioned the narrative feel to it. Yeah, it kind of feels as though we're being invited to go on a journey with the narrator. Let me take you on a journey. I wonder where we're going. I wonder what this fascinating world is going to be about. Am I enticed to say, go on then, I'll come on the journey with you? Sheila's pointed out there's a bit of holding back from being specific. Yeah, deliberately so. Let's have a look at another little snippet from the same text. I see you. Anything we notice here about the particular format of this text? Not just the content, I see you. So what we have in common with the previous snippet may be that use of the personal pronouns and the direct appeal from the writer to the reader. Anything else that we might notice about the way that this is published on the page? Yeah, the handwritten makes it personal. Thanks, Sheila. The red underline makes it seem very important, doesn't it? We underline things in red when they're very important. When someone uses that phrase, I see you, how does that make us feel as the reader, as the audience? Could be apprehensive. Yes, Joe. Some people might regard it as I've had lots of responses from children where they've thought, oh, it feels a bit scary. I'm a bit worried if someone can see me. Can they really see me? Yeah, could it be possibly an alternative plausible explanation is that I'm not leaving you out. I recognise who you are. I want you to feel seen and heard. It could be that too, couldn't it? Let's see if we're right about that. I see your eyes sparkle when you see shapes, watch flickers of light buzzing and fluttering. I see you when you want to pick up that feather, that pebble, that leaf. Do you yearn to climb an oak tree, to get a bird's eye view of the world, to feel the wind of leaves? Just going to invite you to pop in the chat what you notice from this little snippet that builds on the previous two that we've just read together. How does it build on that invitation? Thanks, Joe. Yeah, that direct question to the reader again. Direct appeal to the reader. It wasn't a question in the opening, but now we have got a question. Yeah, we're picking up on some of those rhetorical devices now, aren't we? That deliberate repetition of I see, I see. I particularly like the kind of manipulation of grammatical structures here. So we have that list of I see your eyes sparkle when you see shapes, watch flickers of light buzzing and fluttering, contrasted with the short fragment sentences, that pebble, that leaf, and then the rhetorical question. Do you yearn to climb an oak tree, to get a bird's eye view of the world, to feel the wind of leaves? There's a real language of nature and noticing here. Yeah, Sheila's just said that too. The light, the sounds, the movement, that question is interesting. I think that what the author here is kind of suggesting is that actually, I think you might want to come on this journey with me, but maybe you've just been a little bit shy or a bit reticent, and I can be your guide. I can make it easier for you. I think you'd really enjoy it. It comes from, yeah, thank you, Joe, for making that point about, drawing on our emotions, which actually we might not always necessarily think of with non-fiction. But to me, this is what great expository literature is all about. It's about being passionate about a subject and enticing us, informing and delighting us. Now, I know you probably can't see that very well on your screen, but this is I'll show you the text in a moment. This is the front page of a text, and it's written as a letter from the author to the reader. And you'll see that I've played about with the structure a bit in the way that I've shared those snippets with you. But everything that I've shared so far is there on that letter. So I might, if I were drawing attention to the craft moves, when if I'm working with youngsters, I might talk about the choice around using a handwritten font and underlining as the first thing we see on the page. And of course, it's signed by the author. like it's been handwritten. It's taken from this book, Dara McAnulty's Wild Child, A Journey Through Nature, illustrated by Barry Falls. And we're going to come back to this text after we've heard from Emma and Georgie, but yes, it's Dara, someone, Sheila's popped in the chat. Dara, some of you may be familiar with his first book, Diary of a Young Naturalist, which is a wonderful kind of narrative non-fiction, fabulous kind of autobiography written in a diary form when he was 15. Some of his later books are more deliberately expository literature aimed at a young audience. He's a very passionate conservationist, and writes with real kind of verve and energy in his writing, directly appealing to young people to get involved in looking after their local environment and the environment more broadly. Now, if we had lots of time here, I might invite you to have a go at a bit of a taster draft. So I would ask you to think about the concept behind that letter of an invitation to try and invite someone who you think, actually, if only I could just have a chat with them, I'm sure I could persuade them to come and enjoy this particular passion or hobby with me. Now, Dara's written here about the natural world and exploring the natural world. What if you chose a subject you were particularly passionate about? Maybe it's a hobby that you love. Maybe it's a particular sport that you enjoy playing. If you were going to try out some of the craft moves in Dara's writing, maybe it's the identifying with the reader is one of the things that you want to practice. What might that look like and sound like in a taster draft for a subject, an activity? Could be rock climbing, could be a spin class, could be Zumba. How are you going to persuade someone who you think you know they'd love it if they just came with you? Have a go at writing your first line of your letter. I'll give you 2 minutes and then I'm going to hand over to Georgie and Emma. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. I've got my first line of my letter. I see you nodding your head in time to those Latin beats. I wonder what I'm going to invite you to come and have a go at. Right. Emma and Georgie, I'm going to hand over to you now to share your case study of how you've worked with Opening Doors at Penn. Thank you.
Thank you. So just share our screen. Hoping that you can see that okay. Yep. Okay, so as Angela has said, we're going to share a very, very brief case study about how our engagement with Opening Doors has had an impact on our children as readers and as writers, because the two are so linked. So we began working with, well, we've worked with Angela for many, many years, but we began working with Opening Doors and Leah and Bob only back in sort of September 2023. So it's been relatively recent, these changes. So we're seeing some green shoots, to use and one of Angela's analogy of impact, which we'll share with you today. So just a little bit of context about our school. So we're from Penwood, which is a 3-form entry primary school in Slough, so relatively large. We serve an area which is quite deprived socio-economically. A large proportion of our children have English as an additional language, which is obviously a lot of the time a huge strength and benefit to us. But lots of our children do arrive with a real language paucity in their home language and in English. So we see it as our, one of our core jobs is to enrich their language and enrich their lives with books. In as many ways as we can. We are a talk writing training centre, as Angela has mentioned, and I think we've really loved how talk writing and opening doors as two approaches have really worked in tandem and complemented each other so beautifully, because actually both approaches, their aim is to have English, reading and writing inextricably linked, and to have really great readers and writers in our children at the end of it. We do have moderated writing results from 2024, was a particularly strong year, but our writing is going pretty well. So we're going to share a little bit about our journey with opening doors. So just to give you a bit of an insight into what our teachers have said before we show you the kind of the nitty-gritty of what some of the lessons and outcomes might look like. We asked for some feedback from our year 5 and 6 teachers, and I won't read it all out to you, but a couple of the highlights for me were year 5 teachers talking about their children with SEN and additional needs being more enthused and more active and engaged in lessons than ever before. And what more could we want? And the fact that they couldn't get enough of the books, which was obviously very positive for us. Exploring, children wanting to explore the linked texts. I'll talk a little bit about tapestries of texts in a minute, but wanting to explore those linked texts and additional in their own time. Brilliant. Children making connections, children being motivated to present their writing in different ways because they're motivated by purpose and audience. And then I found the little bit at the end quite interesting about using taster drafts before we get to the big pieces of writing, using taster drafts not only to practice writing skills, but as an aid to further their comprehension. So writing for understanding, not just writing for the sake of writing. Year 6 teachers, lots of similar insights actually, but the kind of joy of the more challenging and complex texts being explored, children broadening their own reader identities, gaining a rich reading diet, being able to emulate the style of different authors. And then my favourite bit is that last bullet point where it says the planning and teaching of our units can be challenging, is engaging and requires careful thought, but the payoff is progress, enjoyment, deep thinking, and so on. And I love that bit because particularly our year 5 and 6 teachers actually, magpieing another of Angela's phrases, we are, as well as our children, we are a challenge seeking species. Our teachers need to be challenged just as much as our children do. And I think our teachers have really relished this challenge of engaging with lots more challenging texts while supporting our children to be able to access them. So what's had the biggest impact for us? Georgie's going to go through lots of these examples, kind of like on the ground in the classroom examples with you in detail, but just to give you kind of a top level idea of which strategies have really impacted our curriculum the most. First one being tapestries of text. So this is the first thing we did with Angela back in 2023. We kind of mapped out units where texts kind of fell under an umbrella of a big question, so concept-driven units. And I think that helped us because we were possibly guilty before that of thinking about texts in isolation, where they weren't, presented to children in a linked fashion. And of course, in the real world, texts are all part of a kind of wider world of literature. So it's forced us to plan in a way that supports children's schema development, and and really helped us to help our children make links between texts. So those two things have been huge for us. Access strategies have been really important, because the greater the challenge, the more strategies we need to have in our toolkit to support children to understand those complex texts. We know that if children struggle with reading, that they don't have an accurate mental model of what they're reading. So the access strategies support us to help our children have that accurate mental model. So things like image, using slivers of text, a real dialogic style of teaching, all help our children to reach that understanding. And I quite like kind of the tentativeness of just introducing a sliver and having that real dialogic lesson where there's no right or wrong at that stage. We're just exploring together and collaborating to build that accurate mental model. Taster drafts have been really, really key, and Georgie will show you lots of examples from our work. But really, it's just, we kind of see it as the training runs before the big marathon at the end. So no one would ever launch into a marathon. I wouldn't launch into a marathon ever, but if you were, then you would do lots of training before you got to that point. So practicing grammar in context, perhaps writing in the style of a different author, just little snippets of writing before you launch into the bigger pieces. And that complements talk for writing very well. We would call it short burst writing in talk for writing, but taster drafts through opening doors. So that's kind of a big picture, and Georgie's going to now talk you through some examples.
Okay, so I'm going to talk more about the strategies in context, specifically about a unit that we've done in Year 6. So first of all, I wanted to talk about access strategies. So Emma mentioned about images. So these are some of the ones that we did in a unit with Year 6. And the reason that this works for us is that it's inclusive. So obviously the idea of opening doors is that challenge for all. So we want to make sure that all children are able to access the really challenging texts that we are looking at. So the images at the beginnings, they give us lots of talk. So the children are then talking lots about the picture, which generates language and understanding. And it's like a form of pre-teaching before they go into the unit as well. So it generates lots of language. It forces a dialogic style of teaching, which is really important and is very effective for us. And we find that it's very inclusive and has really helped the children to get very excited about the unit that we're about to go into, but B, for them all to be able to access, so all of our children are enjoying and accessing the challenging texts. You saw Angela do a sliver of text, which again could be used as an access strategy at the beginning. So we might start with a very small piece of the text so that it's not overwhelming for children. And we don't give them too much at once. Again, lots of talk. It forces lots of back and forth talk between the teacher and the children and between the children themselves. And then it can also be used as bit by bit reading as a deep analysis of the text. So then the children can really dig into what the writer has done. And Angela talked about craft moves. We might also call them tools sometimes that the writer would use. And we use the links to think about all possibilities. So you might have a sliver of text and then predict. So predicting is the first step in thinking like a writer. So if we're talking about writerly and authorly behaviours and discussions, if they have a little bit and then predict like Angela showed us, and then discuss that, that's the first step in becoming a writer and thinking about your metacognitive voice. So we might start by modelling that and then take away that model and get the children to start doing it themselves. So we're going to talk about a blitz unit that we did. And one of the texts that we looked at was Ernie Pyle. So it was an eyewitness account. It's very meaty, quite difficult in places text that we looked at. We also read Jean Lucy Pratt's journal, A Notable Woman. So that was one of the other texts that supplemented that. And Jean's War. And we looked at, and the children did some of their own wider reading. This followed on from a previous unit that we'd done, which was the disoriented perspective of a child in wartime. So the children have lots of context about World War II from their history as well. And then we dived into this quite a new text type because it was like a first-hand journalist account, this Ernie Pyle text. So within that unit, we would also look at some radial questions. So we're talking about deep analysis of rich text. So these radial question layouts, we would give to the children and they would have discussions with each other. There'd be some dialogic teaching about this so that they're analysing the text as a reader, but also as a writer. So then they would do these similar questions with different texts to make links and therefore widen their schema as a writer, but also as a reader. So some of these questions would be reading comprehension style questions, but they also allow them to analyse and look at the writer's craft moves. So why is the metaphorical phrase "drawer of glass" effective in this poem? And then, even though this is in a poem, some of the children were able to then manipulate and use that in an account of a blitz attack, for example. So another one of the strategies that we would use would be looking at it with grammar glasses. So thinking about particular pieces of the text. So actually highlighting, why are these adjectives used? Why does the writer switch from we to you? And thinking about the description in a more, in a deep fashion. So you would then from this had children talking about oxymorons and juxtaposition and having that deep discussion about that text, but then also saving that and using that in their own writing. So again, this is the one from the Ernie Pyle text. How has Ernie Pyle captured the terror and spectacle of the Blitz? So we're focusing on the effect that the writing has on the reader. So it's not just bang a simile in here, it's like, what has this done for us as a reader when we're reading this, and therefore how can we then create the effect that we want to achieve when we're using our own writing. So the idea here was that they were trying to portray both the terror and the spectacle of the Blitz. So it's terrifying and it's awful, but it's almost a firework of explosions as well, so it's quite awesome to look at. So the children had some really good discussions about these, and the radial questions also break them down into manageable steps for the children to be able to discuss. So then again, Angela mentioned craft moves, and we would build perhaps a toolkit or a little palette. I think they call them in Opening Doors sometimes palettes of words and phrases and things that the children can use and draw upon when they're doing their writing. So you can see for this task they worked in partners and they were collecting phrases, juxtapositions, simile, metaphor that they could use when they were writing. So we would also do some of this together. So you can see on the right hand side, that's what we created, and the children were giving me their ideas and I was writing them up onto the flip chart, and they were then displayed in the classroom so the children could draw upon those when they were doing that. So we were generating them together, and they had to use their imagination, but we know that writing is also a manipulation of what we already know. So then we could see lots of things coming through, like the symphony of destruction. They pulled that from one of the texts that we've used, and then the awful savagery was from the Ernie Pyle text. So the children manipulate what they already know. And we would do this, and we would also put these in our Magpie book. So we would call it magpieing or creating that palette, and you can adapt those to the text type. So for example, with the paint palette for this one, we looked at prepositional phrases, but that might not be appropriate for every single text type. And then you can see there's some pictures of the children's Magpie books where they've written down some of the things that they liked from what their friends were saying, from the lots of the text that we read, from the class discussion, and then they would be able to have those and draw upon those when they were doing their own writing. So it helps them to make that link between reading and writing really explicitly. And then we would be modelling, and it's modelling to them how to use what you've read and what you've read and what you've got from other authors in your own writing. So you can see the influence of the authors that they have read. So again, this on the right hand side is from the EEF, but it's just that sort of loop of activating the children's prior knowledge, what they already know about the topic, giving them some explicit instruction. So I would model, so I modeled a piece of writing with the children, so that explicit instruction, and some of it was using the vocabulary that they had given us, modeling that strategy of taking the vocabulary from a text that we've learned, manipulating it and using it. Then there would be some guided practice and shared writing. And then within that guided practice, we'd have some taster drafts so that the children could have their lots of feedback. Like Emma said before, the big piece, they'd do taster drafts to get some feedback and therefore apply that in their independent practice. We would give them feedback again after that, and then the structured reflection would start the process again to move their writing on. So I've got some examples here of some taster drafts. I won't read all of them to you, but on the right-hand side, you've got grenades destroyed the serene slumber of silence, shivering and stumbling. We quickly hurried to the shelter where once had been a city of joy and laughs, but now was an abyss of screeching cries. They said it was a drill, but plumes of dark smoke had not the right smell for a storm. We knew this was no practice. And that was the you could see the influence there of Children in Wartime by Isabel Thrilling, but she's manipulated that in her taster draft. So they try it out, we give them some feedback, and then that moves on their practice and their writing. There's a couple more here. Again, I won't read all of them, but blazing sirens wailed, cracking open the night. And the elegance of I liked this bit because we looked at another poem that was within our unit where there was two different children and their different perspectives on it. And because I can see the influence of that in her final verse where she said, I felt the elegance of a cowslip and the grasp of my mother's hand, while others were forced away out of the caress from a loved one's land. So it's that use of other, not even from this unit, but other pieces of reading that they've done from tapestries of text that has influenced their writing. So again, some more examples of some taster drafts. This was slightly different. We also did some protest poetry. So again, this was a unit that we looked at with Brian Bilston's poem. We also read A Story Like the Wind, and you can see the influence from A Child in Wartime in this poem on the right hand side, but it's been applied to a refugee protest poem. So fleeing home is like fleeing your childhood. You seem confused and alone in the busy streets soaked with rain. Your heart seems weak as if a part of it was ripped out. And then the influence of A Story Like the Wind at the bottom. You find yourself in a small rickety boat with other sullen faces, waves crash. There was a storm going on, but under your feet and both under your feet and in your homes. So again, you can see both Isabel Thrilling and then the Story Like the Wind influence within her taster draft there, which I thought was lovely. I won't read those ones, but what we've used a lot of our work for in Year 6 particularly is to supplement the work that we're doing with children and also giving them all access to greater depth style writing and influence. So what we're going to show you now, the children all had the same blitz input and the same explicit instruction. They did the same taster drafts and generated the vocabulary together. They read the same texts and had the same discussions. Obviously, I must caveat that with lots of them are avid readers in their own time, so they read lots of other texts because they were interested in it and did a lot of research, which you'll see, and they all had the same history unit that we'd done, and that became many different text types when they then did their independent writing. So we had narratives from two different perspectives. So one of my boys chose to write from a German pilot and a British pilot, diary entries, newspaper articles, poems, flashbacks, speeches from Winston Churchill, I'll show you one of those, and some radio transcripts. So they had all sorts of writing, all from this unit. So I won't read all of it to you, but this is an example of one of the diary entries that one of my girls wrote last year. So I'm going to read a paragraph from the middle where she says, as the sounds of destruction carried on, I couldn't help but feel a peculiar feeling. Was it awe? The burst of firework like light erupting from a nearby town was almost beautiful from afar. Or was it rage? rage over what had happened to my birthplace, my home, to my family. The spectacle of destruction, both horrifying and captivating, seemed to have held me in a trance. It was as if my precious little world had been shattered, revealing a side of life I had only ever read about in novels. So that's come from that idea of the terror and spectacle, but she's put it into a diary entry from a girl called Carol, 6th of June 1944. So that was one of my girls who was moderated as Greater Depth. And then same piece again, we had a poem on the left. I like this beginning line: tenement buildings falling to bits, victims of precision hits, sirens wailing, people running, smoke and darkness, engines gunning, anti-aircraft guns are blazing, towards the sky the bullets strafing. So he's chosen to use what we'd talked about, and it ends with rising from the ashen pits, bombardment by the Blitz. So his was a poem. And then the boy on the right, he's talking about a day in the life of the Blitz, and it's actually a really lovely cyclical piece, and he finishes with the same paragraph that he opens with, which is: waking up to the beat of bombs detonating, my eyes open and close to the sound of helpless screams, flak and explosions. Then, as horror invades my thoughts, I regain a sense of awareness and leap out of bed, the world collapsing right before my eyes. And then he finishes it with the same paragraph again. So it's got this lovely, slightly changed, but it's got this, he's made this conscious choice to repeat that again, like as a cycle for the reader. I won't read all of these, but you can see we've got a radio broadcast. I like that he's got the stage directions in there. It's the sound of the crackling radio. And then this is a Winston Churchill speech. So this boy went and watch videos of Winston Churchill, did some reading about Winston Churchill, and he starts: broadcasting from Westminster College, as we stand on the precipice of danger, I implore you to hold fast to your courage and conviction. These are dark and trying times, but it is in these moments of adversity that the true spirit of our nation shines brightest. London, she is so vast and so strong. So he's quite clearly got Winston Churchill's voice in the piece of writing, and he did a lot of research and was speaking like Winston Churchill when he was writing this piece as well. So again, the point is that the equity there, the children have the same exposure to text, they analyze the text together, lots of taster drafts and craft moves that become many different pieces of writing. I'll just quickly, whiz this bit very quickly. I won't read them all to you, but same, the protest poetry then took lots of different forms. Some were a narrative story poem, anti-government poem, some from the point of view of a refugee, some were calling you to action, some were to incite rage, and some were quite satirical as well. So I won't read all of them to you, but I'll read my favorite verse. So this was a boy who's very into poetry and an amazing writer. I think it made Angela cry when she read it, but I'm going to read the last paragraph on the left-hand side. Their lives are battered, tattered, shattered, left behind all that mattered, struggling to survive in tarnished conditions, fighting against conceited politicians. And this child also was a big fan of Lin-Manuel Miranda and Hamilton, so you could see all of the those influences in his writing as well. So it's just really the point that they all have this, they can all be exposed to the same thing, but their writing can still be very unique and very different. And and we're very much enjoying it, and we think that it's helping with our lovely writing.
I don't know how to follow all that lovely writing. Seems a bit boring, but how we've done it, I've borrowed this from Voice 21 actually, who've looked at the EEF's guide to effective professional development, and it just kind of resonated with me, a few bits in particular about how we've gone about introducing something new, which is opening doors, and the many strategies that it involves. And the ones that kind of struck me were building that team of enthusiasts who can have a go and feedback. So we've got some very eager beavers who are keen for that challenge, and who relish that challenge of helping our children to read these really challenging texts. So that's been key. Building confidence step by step, so not overwhelming, doing it step by step. And what's been absolutely key is building expertise for us. So we've been trying to become experts, but also helping our staff to become experts too, because we know that with well-developed staff, we'll get the best for our children. But equipping our staff with that knowledge is where it starts. And then finally, just a couple of reflections and celebrating early impact. Obviously, real deep change takes time. So we might see changes to statutory data outcomes in the next few years, but in terms of like the kind of softer progress measures, I guess, there's a real tangible buzz. So those people who are enthusiasts and early adopters, we can feel it, we can hear it, we can see adaptations to planning, and there's definitely a greater ambition for our children. So we're reading The Secret Garden in year 2, reading lots of Shakespeare in year 5, and people might think we're mad, but we make sure that the children can access those brilliant, wonderful texts from our history and modern texts. And ultimately it pays off. Lots more meaningful links between reading and writing, definitely a motivated staff who want to try things out, and we've seen huge collaboration between year groups and between staff. But yes, that's all from us. I think we've taken longer than we were supposed to. Sorry, Angela.
That's fine. I'm going to do some editing of my last segment, but it was really wonderful to kind of have that really comprehensive overview, actually, of how far you've come on your journey. And Bob's made a really lovely comment in the chat about the quality voices that children write in, unique and bespoke, and it is that kind of voice, choice and agency that really shines through in their writing. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And you're getting lots of plaudits on the chat. So hopefully that means that there'll be colleagues who want to come and find out a bit more. And I'll remind you again that we have that day coming up next week, and I'll put that up on the slides in a moment. So bearing in mind we've got about 10 minutes before the session, I'm going to bring the session to a close and just invite any questions or comments in the last kind of 5 minutes or so. I'm going to just return to my slides and kind of whiz through a couple of things and maybe edit as I go. So thanks again to Emma and to Georgie for giving up your time at the end of a very long day. And I know it's only Thursday and you've still got Friday and a storm to contend with at school tomorrow. So thank you. So I paused in talking about Dara McAnulty's Wild Child as a great example of expository literature. I'm just going to change my screen so that I can see everything a bit more clearly. And when I say expository literature, I like Stewart and Young's definition of this, actually. It's that kind of writing that explains, describes or informs with that lasting artistic merit. And I think what Georgie and Emma have done is show us some other examples of texts that do that too. And yes, it may be poetry, and yes, it may be fiction. Perhaps it's a graphic novel, perhaps it's a picture book, but it can also be non-fiction. And what we particularly admire about these texts is the way that the author can reflect their passion for the subject in particularly creative ways. And we can definitely see that with Dara's work. I think my slides might be in the wrong order. They are, but never mind. So there's the link to the session at Penn that I mentioned. But the reason that we kind of would advocate these kind of texts as great mentor texts for children writing their own informational pieces is because they showcase, they model, they demonstrate how to be innovative, creative, captivating in our design and structure, use finely crafted prose, but be really well informed and faithful to the subject. And so inviting children to write about subjects and content with which they're very familiar and that they know well, write about what you know, places that puts them in a good position to be able to kind of emulate some of those particular craft moves or that way of being a writer in their own non-fiction writing. It's about recognizing that being a writer is a process, it's a life choice, it's about being able to craft a text in order to achieve a particular effect on your reader and enjoying doing that. It's about being able to delight and inform. And one of the things that's particularly leapt out to me in the examples that Georgie and Emma have shared with us is the way that the children clearly, you can read the smile on their face in their writing because they are enjoying that opportunity to craft and to share their voice on the page. And as Stuart and Correa have said, that idea of crafting rich and engaging text is we do that by reading great expository literature with youngsters, and then explore through reading as a writer the different craft moves, the choices of format and structure and voice and language devices that different writers use. I'm going to whiz through this kind of craft move section because we're short on time, but I've kind of included a link to a piece by Ross Young and Felicity Ferguson from the Writing for Pleasure Centre, which kind of gives a bit more detail about this idea of craft moves and practicing and trying out different techniques or tools, as Emma and Georgie described it. And using those in a purposeful, meaningful way, always within a context, so that we are kind of trying out, experimenting, playing with, manipulating, to use the GDS criteria at the end of Key Stage 2, language and grammar and syntax and ideas in order to have a particular effect on the reader. We're experimenting and we're enjoying doing it. Oh, I think I stopped sharing without meaning to. I can see lots more lovely comments in the chat, so thank you very much. Oh, how did that happen? I'm going to whiz. As I said, I'm not going to spend very much time on craft moves, apart from to talk about a particular move. What's happened there? Becky, are you seeing a screen which has got...
Yeah, I can see non-fiction craft moves and then
okay.
boxes. Yeah.
Right, I seem to have my slideshow open twice, which is a bit of a shame. Thank you. So I think what I would just highlight here in relation to craft moves is that some of these are crossover craft moves with fiction, and others are more bespoke to non-fiction. So when we're looking at non-fiction particularly, what makes it different to fiction is often that combination of images and text, the different features of the text, whether that be a contents page or a glossary. The way that the text is formatted on the page is very different to regular prose. And we can also tell that the structure of text might be very different in non-fiction. But remember, there are different ways of structuring within non-fiction. So I'm going to whiz along. I'm not going to talk about interruption construction, but I am going to talk about text scaffolding. So one of the other things that Dara does very well in his book, Wild Child, is share with us some amazing details about the different birds that you might see in your garden. And I think what he does here is classic text scaffolding, in that the opening sentence draws on quite common knowledge. Okay, so I'm going to meet the reader where they are. I've got a lovely picture here of a blackbird. I know you can't see it. I'll show you the full page in a minute. But a picture of a blackbird with black feathers and an orange beak. And then what I'm going to do is add a bit more detail. And as I move through the structure of this paragraph, I can start with information I think you'll be familiar with. I can then draw you in by explaining a difference. include some specialist vocabulary, and introduce some more kind of fascinating facts that you might know less about. But I've started by meeting the reader where they are. And that's the page that it's from. So if we had a bit more time, I'd ask us to have a look at that description of the bird beneath the blackbird, the coal tit, and how we can notice maybe similar patterns in the way the text is structured in order to meet the reader with some fairly broadly known knowledge, and then increase the level of specialist information that is included in the description, so that we build on our foundational knowledge and add to that gradually as we go, making links with other knowledge, making links with other texts, making links with previous sections of the text within the whole book too. So text structure, text formatting, text scaffolding is often quite different in non-fiction. And it's one of those aspects of the craft that maybe we don't spend enough time exploring and discovering as a reader, and maybe then emulating as a writer. Okay, so we're almost out of time. So I'm just going to finish, I think, by talking a little bit about link reading and the tapestry of text ideas, which I said I mentioned right at the beginning of the session, that non-fiction is a part of our tapestry, a golden thread. And if I wanted to explore those concepts of nature and conservation, those themes, I would maybe want to consider how I integrate some picture books, some narrative fiction, some other expository literature, as well as maybe some of the browsable non-fiction I mentioned earlier, and definitely some poetry. So my landscape of text, my tapestry of texts, with Wild Child maybe in the centre, could include this breadth and this range. And as Emma and Georgie have demonstrated, by using and working with multiple mentor texts, the children are more likely to, we're cultivating an environment in which the children are more likely to draw on their reading independently to inform their writing craft themselves. So I'm going to stop there and come back to the main screen with 8 minutes to go. And just check on the chat, Becky, and I'll hand back to you in a moment, but just to look at, see if there's any questions or any comments or things anyone would like to add or say or mention to either myself or Emma or Georgie. Thank you so much, everybody who has taken the time and effort to leave some responses for Emma and Georgie, a colleague who's visited Penwood before. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Joe. Thanks, everybody, for all of your comments. Becky, shall I? Well, I better just mention that Bob's in the room. Bob, is there anything you wanted to say before we hand back to Becky? You're on mute.
I've just put a message on. Inspirational. No, very, very good. I particularly love the the link reading work. As you know, we get so many really fascinating comments from schools using it for literature, and to extend that to non-fiction seems such a fantastic idea, with that same principle that the more you can pick up about styles, then the more likely that the writing will go above and beyond, shall we say, the norm. Because otherwise, you can go through, as I've done many a time on learning reviews, you can go through books and the non-fiction writing in particular looks quite similar from one pupil to another. But with your tapestries and link reading, and of course, great teaching, it ups the chance that you're going to go through books and think, wow, that's really original, or at least that's risk taking, partly come off, partly hasn't. We'll advise them, we'll send them on further. So thanks, Angela. And obviously, Penwood School's work was, they just showed how the pupils benefit. That's CPD. It's theory into practice. So thanks very much, all of you.
Thank you, Bob. And again, I'll just echo Bob's thanks to Emma and to Georgie for giving up their time this evening. Becky, back to you.
Thank you. Yes, well, just more thanks from me to you, Angela, and to you, Emma and Georgie, and to all of you in the audience as well for coming along this evening and spending this time with us. What a treat to get a peek into what's going on at Penwood. So thank you, everybody, very much. And I will let you all go to enjoy your evenings. Do come to some more of our events, and I hope to see you all again. Thank you.